Hi, welcome to A Gray Barn Rising. I'm here with Bootsy Beagle, of course, and I'm reading the poems of a wonderful Chinese poet by the name of Stonehouse. This is a very special reading for me because I discovered the work of Stonehouse 27 years ago, nearly to the day. And we're right near the winter solstice right now. And I was in a bookstore in Massachusetts and found this incredibly gorgeous book, The Mountain Poems of Stonehouse. And I hope you can see it. It has this dust jacket and these this Japanese stitching, and these wonderful uncut pages, these leaves that are doubled with the Chinese text and the English text side by side. It's one of my very favorite books, not only for the content, but for the way that it's constructed. This book has recently been reissued. Actually, it's been reissued a few times in different formats. In the late 90s, it was reissued as The Zen Works of Stonehouse by Mercury House Press, and then later by Counterpoint Press. And recently, it's been reissued by Copper Canyon Press, but without the Zen discourses. The book is returned now to the poems with added and extensive commentary by the translator Red Pine. His name is Bill Porter, but he goes by the name Red Pine. Stonehouse is a really interesting poet because he lived a reclusive life in the mountains like a lot of Chinese hermit poets. He was born in 1272 Common Era. He lived to be 81 years old, and he started by studying Confucianism, but left those teachings around age 20. And when he saw a wandering monk pass by, prior to that he had become a Buddhist novice, and then he saw a wandering monk pass by one day, and he decided to join him on his travels to visit a great Zen master, and ended up liking the Zen master. He had answered some questions for him, and the Zen master liked Stonehouse's responses to the questions. And so he stayed with this teacher for about 7 years, and then he decided to strike out on his own again to discover the teachings in a deeper way. But his teacher admonished him and said, "You're still a blind donkey," something to the effect of, "You're still a blind donkey." And he sent him to yet another teacher who Stonehouse stayed with for 6 years and studied with him. Stonehouse, that teacher became an abbot at a very famous temple and invited Stonehouse to come stay with him as head meditation master. Stonehouse did that for, I believe, 6 or 7 years, something like that. And then he left for his mountain home again. He loved the mountains. He loved the reclusiveness of the mountains, so he could meditate and write poetry. The emperor asked him several years later to come and have some high position in another temple, and Stonehouse did that for approximately 7 years, and then he pleaded old age and just wanted to return to his hut in the mountains to meditate and to write, and he did that. The Chinese hermit poets have a long history of taking to the mountains, seeking solitude, meditating, writing poetry, living on very little. And Stonehouse himself had a meager existence. He survived on wild plants, yams, things like that, and decided not to take to begging, which some of the monks had done. So let me just get into the poems a little bit. I should also mention the name Stonehouse. This is not unusual among Chinese poets to take a different name. Chinese poets and visual artists, they would often take another name, sometimes more than one name in their lifetime. In the tradition, say, of the Tang poet Han Shan, who many viewers may know, there was the name Cold Mountain, and translated out to Han Shan. He lived on Cold Mountain and became one in spirit with the mountain, and took on that name. So too with Stonehouse. He lived near the Yushan Mountains, and there was a cave there, a stone house, that he felt particularly connected with. People aren't sure how he acquired the name Stonehouse, but that's the best guess. I want to give you his final poem first, because there's a tradition in Chinese poetry, particularly among Zen masters, to write what's called a death poem. And they give their parting words through a poem, and then they leave the body. And he was 81 years old, he didn't feel well. He got up the next day and he told his followers that he thought that he was getting ready to leave the body. And they said, "Master, do you have any parting words for us?" He took up his brush and wrote the following, and then he left the body right after that. Corpses don't stink in the mountains. There's no need to bury them deep. I might not have the fire of samadhi, but enough wood to end this family line. And those were his closing words. These poems don't have titles, they're numbered throughout, and I'm going to be reading from the brand new translation, the Copper Canyon book, that Red Pine has rendered and revised, worked through those translations, and perfected them. I'm just going to pause because there's just numbers here and I don't want to disrupt the flow. They're very quiet poems. I'm sitting here actually by a fire. I have a fireplace and I've got my beagle hound, and I just do not want to disrupt the mood with anything too disruptive as a title in this case. And of course I'm drinking a cup of Drum Mountain White Cloud tea this evening, which is grown in Fujian province in the shade of a Buddhist monastery, so it couldn't be more appropriate. Grave upon grave, buried beneath weeds. Before their funerals they carried gold seals. But desire is no match for detachment. And how can ambition compete with restraint? Lured by bait, golden fish end up in kettles. Uncaged magic wings fly high. Worldly affairs don't concern a hermit. I weave my robe from homegrown hemp. To glorify the way, what should people turn to? To words and deeds that agree, but oceans of greed never fill up, and sprouts of delusion keep growing. Plum trees in bloom cleanse a recluse. A garden of taro cheers a lone monk. Those who follow rules in their huts never see the way past the mountains. Don't think a mountain home means you're free. A day doesn't pass without its cares. Old ladies steal my bamboo shoots. Boys lead oxen into the wheat. Grubs and beetles destroy my greens. Boars and squirrels devour the rice. Things don't always go my way. What can I do but turn to myself? Seclusion, of course, means far from the world. Thick moss, deep woods, and perfumed plants. A sight of mountains, rain or shine. No sounds of a market, day or night. I burn dry leaves in my stove to make tea, and to patch my old robe, I cut a cloud by the cliff. Lifetimes seldom fill 100 years. Why suffer chasing profit and fame? I entered the mountains and learned to be dumb. I'm usually too tired to open my mouth. I don't point out the mistakes of others. My own faults are what I try to alter. The tea must be ready, my clay stove is red. The moon must be up, the paper windows are white. Who in the past saw through this transient world? Yan Zhu Ling fished alone from his rock. Yen Zuling was another recluse. He was the friend of someone who led a rebellion and gained political prominence, and this friend invited Len Zuling to accompany him to the capital and have a prominent political position, and he opted out of that. He simply wanted to live in the mountains, so that's what that reference is. You likely know what koans are. They're often seemingly nonsensical statements that hinge on paradox. And you've probably heard a Zen koan like, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" Or, "What is your face before your parents were born?" Love that shift in verb tense in that koan. What is your face before your parents were born? The koan is designed to reorient the practitioner to the question and not to just simply seek the answer. Anyway, there's reference to koans in this poem. A white-haired Zen monk with a hut for my home. The wind has torn my robe into rags. Down by the stream I rake leaves for my stove. After a frost, I wrap a mat around my orange tree. Ultimate reality isn't created. Ready-made koans aren't worth a thought. All day I sit by my open window, looking at mountains without lowering the shade. A monk on his own sits quiet and relaxed. He survives all year on what karma brings. Bamboo and yellow flowers simplify his thoughts. His life is as plain as a cloud or a stream. He doesn't mistake a rock for a tiger on a hill, or the image of a bow for a snake in his bowl. Oblivious in the woods to worldly affairs, at sunset he watches the crows flying back. I may be white-haired and nothing but bones, but I'm versed in the work of daily survival. In fall I pound thistles in a wooden mortar. In spring I dry vine buds in a wicker tray. I buy Solomon's seal from a peddler down below. For seaweed I rely on a monk from across the sea. But who would have guessed at 77 I would dig a pond for lotus roots and water chestnuts? A 100 years pass by in a flash. How many think this through? If what you're doing right now isn't clear, the edge between life and death is sheer. Stitches on a monk's robe are a loving wife's tears. Jade grains of rice are an old farmer's fat. Don't think who gives receives no reward. A fruit forms in time where there is a seed. To get to the end, the very end, let it all go. Let it go. Foam piles up on a pair of lips. Moss grows thick on an ancient road. A wooden horse flashes through the clouds. A clay ox thunders beneath the waves. A clear moonlit night amid 10,000 snowy peaks. A hidden scent says spring has reached the winter plum. Three or four naps every day. Still don't exhaust all my free time. I walk around the jade bamboo a few times, then hike past the pines and gaze at far mountains. How could someone who practices not become a Buddha? If water drips long enough, even rocks wear through. It's not true. A thick skull can't be pierced. A person just needs a hard enough mind. I sit and meditate in the quiet and dark, where nothing comes to mind. I sweep in front when the west wind is done. I make a path for the moonlight. The moon lights up my door. The wind blows open my robe. Sit down on a rock, my friend. Hear my mountain song. Black hair turns to snow. Dawn light to evening shade. Everything is dew on the grass. Nothing stays the same. If you don't read sutras when you're young, you won't know what they mean when you're older. You won't know a million doorways are all inside the square inch of your mind. Indulging all day in desire and hate. How often do you think about life and death? One day illness or old age will surprise you. Remorse then will be too late. I'll give you two more. Letting go means letting everything go. Buddhahood has to go too. Each thought becomes a demon. Each word invites more trouble. Survive instead on what karma brings. Pass your days in freedom. Make the Dharma your practice. Lead your ox to the mill. Finally, I want to close with this little poem. I built my hut on top of Hesya summit. Plowing and hoeing make up my day. Half a dozen terraced fields. 2 or 3 hermit neighbors. I made a pond for the moon and sell wood to buy grain. An old man with few schemes. I've told you all that I own. So those are some of the works contained in the Mountain Poems of Stonehouse. I read from the brand new translation that also includes commentary by the translator Red Pine. I hope you seek out the work of Stonehouse. I think it is vital, even all of these centuries later, and can lend encouragement and insight for our own goals and our own seeking. Thank you so much for joining Bootsy and me for another episode of A Great Barn Ride.